Welcome to the Two Guys in a Cooler channel. Today we have a boneless strip loin, some dry aging steak wraps from the sausage maker, and we're going to be answering the question, how long should you dry age your beef? So with that question in mind, we need to take something into consideration. Dry aged beef delivers flavors that are very subjective depending on how long it's dry aged for. So the real answer to this question lies in personal preference, but there is one thing that is incredibly important for you to know that I discovered through these experiments when you dry age beef at home in your refrigerator. And if you stick around to the very end, I will reveal that along with my recommendations on how long you should dry age your beef that will deliver amazing results every time. We're using the sausage maker's dry aging steak wraps to dry age beef at home in our refrigerator because it is the easiest, hands down best way to dry age meat at home. Not a lot of fuss. And if you want to see a video about that, click that link in the top right hand corner. So we're going to put that in our fridge, and here's how we're going to roll this experiment out. I'm going to dry age that strip loin for 150 days, and then we're going to cut steaks off at day 30, 45, 60, 100, 125, and then at 150. We're going to cook those steaks up all at the same time, and then I'm going to let you know the differences between each one of them. 30 days have passed. It's time to cut our first steak off, and this is what that's going to look like. We're starting to get a nice deeper red. It doesn't smell too much like dry aging, but the pellicle is definitely formed quite nicely, and we're going to go ahead and cut that off. Now, I have had some people ask, can you remove that plant-based material without having to cut it off? Absolutely. Run it under some water and it comes off like gelatin. So if you have plans for the pellicle, you can easily remove that plant-based wrap and then use the pellicle for whatever you want. So that's what our 30-day steak is going to look like. And here's why I love these wraps so much, is because they're super versatile. Right here, you're going to watch me cut a little piece of that dry aged wrap off and use it like a band-aid to reseal that dry aged meat so that I can put it back in the fridge. This also works great to reseal salami while it's hanging in your drying chamber, but you can use this to make pancetta, bresaola, copa, you name it. I love the size of the wrap because you can custom fit it. I've done 16-pound roasts all the way down to duck breasts and other things that are too controversial for me to even mention because the internet cannot handle it. And we are moving forward. Notice I'm starting to get a little bit of mold growth. We're now at 45 days into the process. We're going to cut steak number 2 off. And what's interesting is that at 45 days, you are going to get those striations of mold. Your color is going to be a little bit darker, and you're going to start to smell that unique dry aging smell, cheesy notes, earthy notes, and it's going to be faint, but it's definitely going to start to happen at about 45 days if you dry age in your refrigerator. So we're going to go ahead and put that back in the fridge, and let me show you what this particular steak looks like. Notice our pellicle is going to be a little bit thicker, not by much, but this is what our 45-day-old dry aged steak is going to look like. And we're going to set that to the side. So at this point, we're looking at 60 days. Now, 60 days is when things start to change dramatically. This is when the characteristics of your steak are going to take on radical transformations as far as aroma, flavor, and texture. At this point, it's undeniable. The cheesy notes, the funkiness is really going to start to come out. The pellicle is going to be a little bit thicker. The texture is going to slightly change. And now we get into what they call extreme dry aging. This is 60 days on up. So currently this is 100 days of dry aging, and this is territory that most people don't venture into when they dry age meat. But today, that's exactly where we're going. So notice the colors, it's going to be a lot richer. You're going to start to get those rubies. The pellicle is definitely getting thicker and a little more firm. It's a little bit more difficult to cut into, and the aromas are very specific. Funky is a great word to describe it in a really good way, though. I mean, think of like a really funky aged cheese. You know, there's not a lot of people that go for it, but those that do really love it. This is what that 100-day-old aged steak is going to look like. And the texture has definitely changed. The aromas are strong. And let's move on to the next one. This one is 125 days. Strong smell. The texture is more firm. The pellicle was more thick. Let's go to the last steak right here. 150 days as we finish up this particular strip loin. Look at the darkness of it. Look at that pellicle. It's incredibly thick as compared to, let's say, the 30-day. Look, the color is dramatic, the aromas are dramatic, the texture is dramatic, and I can only imagine that the flavor is going to be dramatic. There is nothing about this that is ordinary. Here's what we're going to do, starting from left to right, 30 all the way to 150. We're just going to put some salt, pepper, put it in a vacuum seal bag, and then we're going to sous vide this for a couple hours as we prepare to do a reverse sear. At which point, my wife is going to join me, my daughter's going to join me. We're going to taste these steaks, and I'm going to let you know exactly what I think. The time has come to jump into these steaks. Let's start at 30 days dry aged. This steak was definitely more tender. It didn't have a lot of overwhelming dry aged flavor, but you could definitely tell that it was enhanced in some way. It tasted delicious and was very juicy. At 45 days, it was also tender, very juicy, and started to have the subtle characteristics of that dry aged meat flavor. Cheesy notes, earthy notes, but it wasn't too strong. At 60 days, this is where things got interesting. The dry aged flavor became definitely more noticeable, but at the same time, the texture was starting to change slightly. It was still juicy, although a little more firm. Let's look at the 100-day-old dry aged steak. Now, the flavor was incredible, like really strong, really funky, but I want you to pay attention to the texture. Here's what I noticed, and this is what's important if you want to dry age at home. Anything after 60 days, your flavor, although is going to get enhanced, your texture is going to start to suffer. Look at the texture of that meat right there. And this is because the low humidity in your refrigerator is going to continually want to draw moisture out of your steak relatively fast, unlike having your steak in a high humid environment. At 125 days, same thing. The flavor, really unique, really funky, but it's losing its moisture and the texture is starting to firm up. At 150 days, notice that it's almost beginning to dry out, kind of like you were making prosciutto or some sort of charcuterie. Although the flavor was great, now don't get me wrong, super funky, but because of the texture, it made for a very unpleasant experience at 150 days. So how long should you be dry aging your beef? Well, let me tell you this. If you want a nice tender cut, 21 to 30 days is absolutely perfect. If you want to start to experience that dry aged flavor and not lose texture quality, you want to go 45 to 50 days. Your steak's going to be tender, juicy. It is going to have that dry aged flavor, and it's going to be absolutely delicious. Like I said, over 60 days, you're going to start to suffer a texture loss. Be sure to check out our website at twoguysintacooler.com, where we go into more detail about this project, and that site is made possible thanks to the patrons of the channel. If you like what we do and you want to support our work, check out our Patreon link, and don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. We post new videos all the time. We'll see you in the next one.